Okay, we're going to pick up our story. We finished chapter 23 last week, and we started chapter 24. And we know that Paul has been carried to from Jerusalem to Caesarea, and this is what is left of Caesarea today. It was the capital of Judea, and there was a lot of people that lived here. King Agrippa or King Herod had a palace there. The governor lived there. It was really a big place because it was a seaport city. Well, as we look and we pick up our story, Paul is there. Now, he had been there for 5 days. He's waiting for Ananias and the others to come to be accused before Felix, the governor. Now then, as they're there, he had waited. Well, Ananias finally shows up, and he's got this guy by the name of Ananias with him, and he's the lawyer. And he's going to be the dude who brings the charges against Paul. Now then, he's very good, he's very smart. And as we begin to read, we're going to see that it says, beginning in verse 2, after Paul had been summoned, this orator, this guy who knew the law forwards and backwards, is the one that's going to bring all the accusations against Paul before the governor. And he starts off like most, I guess, good people do, blowing smoke at Felix, trying to puff him up, and he says, hey man, look, our country's at peace right now, and it's all because of you, all your ideas and everything that you've done, and we're so thankful for that. And then he goes on and he says, but we have found a man, and I'm sure he pointed at Paul at that time, and says he's a public menace. He stirs up dissension everywhere he goes, in Asia and in Asia Minor and in Europe. He's a menace, and he stirs up dissension throughout the world. And he says he's the ringleader of the Nazarenes. Now then, this is what the Sanhedrin and those church officials referred to Christianity as Nazarenes, because they were a different group. They acted different, everything about them was different. So they're trying to make Paul and the Christians look like some kind of oddballs. Anyway, he said he's the ringleader. Hey, he even came to the temple and tried to desecrate the temple, which that wasn't so. Said, why don't you interrogate him for yourself, and you're going to find out. Now then, the Jews that go with Ananias are not made up of Pharisees. They're all made up of Sadducees. So they hated Paul. They hated the way. They hated everything about Jesus. And these are the ones that are standing outside when Christ was crucified, saying, crucify him. And when Pilate said, well, look, I can give you one. You choose who you want. And they was wanting Barabbas to be free. Barabbas was a murderer. So anyway, that's who these people are. Now then, in picking up, and it's hard for me to see because these are weak glasses. It says, knowing that for many years you've been the judge to this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. So Paul's getting his time now. Felix has said, hey, you come here. So he does. And Paul says, hey, look, these dudes can't prove a thing. Everything they're telling you, I didn't do. He said, all I did was preach about the way, about the Jesus Christ. And that is what Paul did. Every time he gives his defense before any governor or in any synagogue, he tells the story of the saving grace of Jesus Christ that comes through his death and resurrection. So Paul says, hey, I didn't do any of this. I serve God. Hey, I believe in the law. I know the law. And I have hope in God. And these men should themselves, they know it. But anyway, all Paul has done is preach the resurrection to both the righteous and to the unrighteous. Picking up in verse 16, he says, hey, in view of this, I do myself maintain blameless conscience. Hey, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So he said, after several years, and we know that last missionary journey, he was gone for 4 years. He says, hey, I come back and I bring gifts and I bring offerings back to the temple, and these clowns tell me that I need to go get purified. Well, they're telling him that he has to go get purified like the Nazarenes do. Well, Paul doesn't say anything. He just goes and he does it, and that's where the council is going to get a hold of him. And because, again, he's still preaching the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's where we're at. So now then, as Paul stands before Felix, this is good stuff. Look at what it says in verse 22. Felix had knowledge of the way. Felix had knowledge of Christianity. Now then, he tells him, hey, look, when the commander gets here, I'm going to decide your case. And he's talking to Paul. I'm going to decide then your case. Well, he takes Paul away, he keeps him in custody, but Paul is given certain freedoms. When we get into the letters that Paul writes, it is during this time of freedom that he is going to get to write letters, and his friends are going to deliver those letters to the different churches. Now, this is going to be a pattern that starts here in Caesarea, but it also is going to continue back in Rome from Mamertine prison. So Paul has all this time to write these letters of encouragement to his churches, but those letters are encouragement to me and you if we read those things today. So that's where he's at. Now then, when we look at verses 24 through 27, there's some information here that I'm going to give you that you ain't going to find in the Bible. You're going to have to use Josephus and Rufus and several of these first century historians to know what is going on here. Now then, in verse 24, Felix calls his wife Drusilla, hey, and it says that she's Jewish. Well, other than Mark, who knows why or how she is Jewish? That's why I like doing this, because I like giving information that nobody knows. Anyway, we're going to look at this. Well, they call them together and say, hey, bring Paul down. And Paul comes down, and to Drusilla and to Felix, he gives them the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now then, why is Drusilla important to our story? Well, glad you asked, because Drusilla is the youngest of 3 daughters who was born to Herod Agrippa I. He is going to be the king of Judea. Now then, that would make Drusilla the great-granddaughter of Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the one who refurbished the temple, and he's the one who wanted to kill all the babies back in Bethlehem, hoping to destroy Jesus. So Drusilla, along with Felix, and Felix is just her husband at this time. Folks, she ain't a good person. But when Paul is preaching, she is so intrigued by what he's saying that she wanted to learn more about it. Now then, Drusilla was given in marriage to the king of Emesa when she was only 14 years old. She has had many, many marriages. And when we look at what Josephus had to say, Livy and Rufus have to say about the Herod family, folks, these folks real. I mean, they changed wives at the drop of a hat. But now, Bernice, who we'll talk about just a little bit later, is Drusilla's older sister. And she was given in marriage at age 16. Now then, she divorces her husband after after her and her brother had a constant affair throughout their lives. Anyway, that's the kind of person she is. So since they're a member of the Herod family, they're Jews. So that is how Drusilla knows. She knows the law of Moses. She knows the writings of the prophets. So she is knowledgeable of this, because if you're the king's children, guess what? You're going to get the best education money can buy. So she is very knowledgeable of these things. Now, so when Paul comes in and he presents the gospel to Felix and to Drusilla, they are intrigued by what he says, by what he has to say. Knowing the scriptures, this Jesus has been preached throughout history, the coming Messiah. So she knew that. So Paul then picks up in verses 24 and 25. He talks about righteousness, having the right relationship with God. But then he comes in and talks about having self-control. Now, undoubtedly, this woman and her sister Bernice do not have self-control because of all the men that are in their lives. So it has kind of struck a nerve with her when Paul is talking about self-control, especially when Paul talks about the judgment that is coming. Now, think about on the day that you were saved, or leading up to your salvation. Was it not guilt of your sins? Was it not the drawing power of God that opened your eyes to say, hey, I'm a sinner and I'm on my way to hell? And that drawing power is what brought us to call upon the Lord, to make us believe in the gospel. I think that is what is going on here. Now, the scriptures never tell us if Drusilla acts on it or not, other than she's pretty intrigued with what's going on. So anyway, for us, and this is what happens here with Paul. Paul gives you and me the model of how we should present the gospel in this lost and dying world, especially to family and friends who do not believe. And we all got it. Hey, I got family that I don't know where they come up with some of their beliefs, but it ain't out of that book. I guarantee it. And that's what we're facing, and that's what is going on here. So Paul proclaims the gospel. He doesn't waver. He doesn't water it down so he doesn't hurt somebody's feelings. He lets the gospel stand for itself. He preaches the truth, and when you preach the truth or you testify the truth, guess what's going to happen? God's word is going to penetrate their hearts. Not what I say or what you say. When we testify the truth, it is the word of God that penetrates those hearts. Now then, so they're drawn to the message. Now then, I do not know who said this, but I wrote it down. And I use it quite a bit when I preach. But the gospel has power to reach even the hardest of hearts when presented without shame or apology. How many times, and I get to thinking myself here, how many times did I have opportunity to witness to some of my friends, especially those I played ball with? Witness to them, but I don't witness like I should. You know, and I'm gonna here to tell you right now, you can't stand up to somebody that's lost, a friend, and say, "You're going to hell if you don't believe." Folks, guess what you just did? Stay out the door. But when we present the gospel with truth and honesty and sincerity, God is going to use that to touch the hearts of those people. But anyway, Paul said in Romans 1:16, he said, "Hey, I'm not afraid of the gospel of Jesus Christ." And he goes on. Anyway, now we're going to get to Bernice, the older sister, when she shows up with Festus. And it ain't Gunsmoke Festus that we're going to be talking about. But anyway, that is where we're at. Now, Felix ain't a good guy. Felix is wanting a bribe from Paul. Now, he's given Paul pretty much the run of Herod's palace. He's letting him stay there while he's awaiting for the Jews to come down from Jerusalem to make accusations. But Felix ain't a good guy neither. So, we got any questions about chapter 24? Okay, let's pick up with chapter 25. I'm moving on good today. And this is going to be Paul as he stands before Festus. Now then, the historians, the first century historians, they all picture Festus as a good guy. He's reasonable. He knows Roman law. He is not he's not there for bribes. He's not there for personal gain. Festus is a good guy. However, he's going to be married to a wicked woman. All right, so beginning in chapter 25, verse 1, Festus, he arrives to the province, and once he's there, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Now then, 3 days later, Ananias and those Sadducees, those leading Jews, they come to him and they bring charges against Paul. Now, Paul is still back down in Caesarea. So, they're pleading with Festus. Festus is now the brand new governor. Felix is out. So anyway, they come to him and they request, "Hey, we want you to bring Paul up here to Jerusalem, and we want to bring charges to him." Now, at the very same time, they got plans to ambush the Romans that are bringing Paul and killing. Did anybody sign up with this? Okay, so anyway, they're going to ambush them. They're going to kill Paul. That is all they want to do. They could care less about Roman law. They could care less about the law of Moses, they hated Paul for what he stood for. They hated Paul because he was right. So they want to kill him. Well, Festus ain't stupid. So he says, hey, have your influential men. Y'all come on down to Caesarea, and there y'all can bring charges against him in front of me. Well, guess what? Them dudes don't want to do that. So, after Festus stayed about 8 or 10 days in Jerusalem, he went back down to Caesarea. So now this is going to be the first time that he is going to take his seat on the tribunal. So he comes in, he gathers everybody around, and he orders Paul to be brought to him. Now Paul arrived, after Paul arrived, the Jews from Jerusalem, they show up, and they're bringing these charges again against Paul. Now Paul's just standing there. He's heard all this stuff before. They've argued all this stuff before, but this is the first time that Festus has heard any of this. And as they bring the charges against him, they couldn't prove any of them. Now then, Festus, being an open-minded man, he could see through this. So he looks at Paul. He said, well, Paul, what you got to say for yourself? Paul said, I ain't done nothing wrong. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything against the law of Moses. I didn't do anything against the temple. I didn't do anything against the law of Rome. I didn't do anything against Caesar. And then Festus said, well, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me in front of your accusers? Folks, Paul ain't no dummy. Look at verse 10. Paul said, and here he's going to play the citizenship card, okay? Paul said, I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal. Now he's talking to Festus. Festus is representing a representative of Caesar. He says, this is where I ought to be tried. Not back in Jerusalem. Right here is the capital of Judea. Right here is where the Roman capital of Judea is. This is where I need to be tried before Caesar's court. I didn't do anything. Now then, as it goes on, he says, if there is nothing to the accusations that these men bring to you, no one can hand me over to them. I said, you can't hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Uh-oh, the rules now have changed from Jewish law to the real law. It has changed to Roman law. Law according to Rome. So that is what he's did. Paul's not dumb. He knows if he goes back up there, they're going to try to kill him if they don't kill him. So Festus, he had to call his council together, and he said, okay, guys, what do y'all think we need to do? Well, Festus knows the law, so does his council, and they said, well, you got to let this guy go. If he's appealed to Caesar, he's got to go back to, he's got to go to Rome. He's got to go to Caesar. Well, Festus comes back in, and I can just see it. I mean, you know, he's disgusted with Ananias and his leaders. He's disgusted with this whole situation because Paul has been here for over 2 years. He's been held captive in Caesarea. Festus is fed up. I can just see him say, hey, you don't go to Caesar? You're gone. And he literally has washed his hands now of this whole situation. And folks, the dynamics of everything is going to change for me and for you. So, let's pick up our story in verse 13. It said, several days had passed. Now then, look who shows up. King Agrippa and Bernice. You remember I told you that Bernice was Drusilla's older sister? Well, Bernice sure ain't no good woman. So, again, her great-grandfather, Herod the Great, her husband, Agrippa the First, is the king of Judea, and what is going on here is we're getting some connections between politics and religion in the first century, and how the church is going to be persecuted. But more importantly, there's going to be a connection here because of Paul wanting to go to Caesar, and because of the relationship with Herod's family. We're going to see how all this is important to us. Now then, so Bernice married Polemon, who was the king of Sicily. Now, her marriage was dissolved because she has an affair with Festus. Festus takes her and marries her, and they're going to end up having 2 children. Well, long story short, she's going to get rid of Festus, and she is going to have an affair with Titus, who is later going to become the emperor of Rome. Can you see how all this stuff is playing out? Man, I tell you what, you want to succeed, you part of Herod's family, you just find you a different husband every other day, or go and hook up with your brother and you got it made. Now then, in the New Testament, again, this is a reminder of the political and social dynamics between Christianity, Christians, and the church. Bernice's interaction is the key figure between Paul and the emperor Titus as he goes. Can you see this? I mean, they know who Paul is before he gets there. It ain't just like Paul shows up. They've been talking about Paul for 2 years. In Herod's court, in the king of Caesarea, in Europe, back in Judea, in Rome. All these folks have been talking about that crazy Paul that's preaching about a dead man. So that's where we're at here. So Agrippa and Bernice arrive. Now then, they're there to pay their respects to Festus, who is the new governor of Judea. So Paul's case now is going to not only be heard before the governor, Festus, but King Agrippa as well. Now then, so Festus tells Agrippa, so look, the Jews wanted me to pass judgment on him, but I could see through it. So when he asked to go to see the emperor, I granted him his request because he is a citizen of Rome. So that said, Festus says, well, look, bring him in here. I want to talk to him too. And that is where we're at. So Paul comes in, Festus, Bernice, Agrippa, they're all there. The assembly is there. Now then, so they're sitting with the tribunal, they're sitting at the court. Here these judges are sitting up here. The accusers come in, they stand up, and they bring the same old charges again. How stupid is that? Sounds like the world we're living in today, doesn't it? I don't care if you're found not guilty. I'm going to accuse you again for something else. Anyway, so when they come in, Felix says, the only thing that I can find is that they've got a disagreement about their law and about their religion. Did you hear that? And they do have a disagreement about the law and about their religion, because they had rewritten the law of Moses to suit themselves. Paul knew that. Paul preached against it. Not only did they do that, but Paul, being a Pharisee, he believed in angels. He believed in a spirit that lives within you. He believed in resurrection of the dead. He believed in those things, but Ananias and the Sadducees, they don't believe this. And there is the disagreement, and you can't fool Festus because he ain't stupid. Like Festus Hagel. But anyway, there they are. So he says, hey, look, I've ordered you to go to the emperor, to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I'd also like to hear the man myself for tomorrow. Now then, next week, we're going to hear what Paul has to say to King Agrippa, to Bernice, and to Festus. Folks, it is going to be a very persuasive argument, but it is where we're going to get the famous words, almost thou persuadest me to become a Christian. Well, folks, them's got to be the saddest words that you'll ever hear, because how many times have we had friends and loved ones tell us, hey, I'm just not interested right now. Right now is not a convenient time for me. Y'all ever heard that? Got any questions thus far? Yes, sir.
Their judicial system back then worked about like ours today.
Yeah.
They drug it out and drug it out and drug it out, didn't they?
Yes. Yes.
Just a little tidbit, Drusilla and her son were killed by the volcano at Pompeii.
Vesuvius.
Yes. They killed Mount Vesuvius.
Killed in 79 in that volcano. I'm telling you, that's why I love history. I love really going back and reading some of these from first, second century historians. Man, it just, whew. And that's what, Paul didn't have, and the writers then, they didn't have to write about that because they were living it. They just assumed that everybody knew it. Anything else?
How many husbands did these two girls have?
Bernice, I think, had 5. And Titus was the emperor. She never married him. She just was the concubine.
Sounded like the woman at the well, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
And Drusilla, we know, had 4.
And Bernice that was there with Agrippa, my Bible says that Bernice was his sister. That they were living
Was.
incestuous.
It wasn't. Did I not say that a while ago? That she's hanging out with her brother. See, I'm telling you, hey, see, you think these things in the Bible pretty good, folks. They ain't. Anything else?